Alright, second lecture of week 1. We are continuing talking about sections 4 and 5 out of chapter 1. So section 4 is the functions of human life. So we are going to talk about why it's so important that we talk about these different levels of organization and why they're so essential to the function of humans. We're going to talk just a little bit about different types of metabolism, anabolism, and catabolism. So we'll touch briefly on those, and then we are going to talk just a little bit about human responsiveness and movement, as well as talking a little bit about growth, differentiation, and reproduction. Alright, so we have some different functions of human life, and they are organization, which we covered mostly in our previous lecture, but also metabolism, responsiveness, movement, development, and reproduction are all different functions of human life. So again, organization, just to kind of refresh this a little bit, living things have different levels of organization. We usually start at the atomic level, build up to molecules, and then cells. Cells make tissues, tissues make organs, organs make organ systems, and then organ systems together make the organism. And this keeps going as we kind of get bigger and broader in the grand scheme of the world. We're not going to go into all of that detail. I do cover that in a different class that I teach, but we're not going to go into populations, communities, ecosystems, and biospheres in this particular class since it is focused on human anatomy specifically. Alright, so just kind of seeing that textually rather than graphically. So we've got, again, atoms, molecules, cells, tissues, organs, so on and so forth. So check back in the previous lecture if you need a little bit more of a refresher on those different levels. Alright, metabolism. So metabolism is going to use a little bit of energy and some raw materials that we get from the things that we consume, like food and beverages. So metabolism, by definition, is all of the different chemical reactions that occur within the cells of different living things. In this case, it's obviously humans. So our metabolism is all of the chemical reactions that are taking place within our cells. And so cells can extract energy from the food that we ingest and transform it to make energy, which enables our cells to do all of their jobs, whatever that is, whether it's a muscle cell contracting or an immune cell going after a bacteria or something like that. We need energy in order for all of those different things to occur. So there are two types of metabolism, catabolism and anabolism. They are kind of opposite sides of the same coin. So anabolism is transforming energy by converting the different chemicals and energy into different cellular components. And so this is basically taking kind of the building blocks, energy and little building blocks, and making bigger things. So this would be the creation of new materials. For example, when your muscles are growing, we are making more organelles and more tissue and stuff like that, more cells. We need to replicate our cells, and we need energy and smaller building blocks in order to do stuff like that. Catabolism, on the other hand, is breaking down or decomposing organic matter. This is normally what people think of when they hear the word metabolism, is you eat food and then you break it down and make energy and all of the little pieces that make up that food. So this is normally what people associate metabolism with. But again, there is this other type of metabolism that's also really, really important for the function of a human being, because we can't just survive by breaking down the food that we eat. We still need to be creating new cells and stuff like that in order for us to grow and repair all of the different tissues as they get damaged by a variety of things. Next level is responsiveness. So this is our ability to detect and respond to different stimuli from the environment, whether that's inside of our body, so our internal environment, or outside of our body, our external environment. So internal responsiveness would be something like hunger cues. So your body recognizes that it's a little low on glucose. It needs some more glucose in order to carry out different processes of metabolism. In that particular case, it would be the catabolism. We are breaking things down to produce energy. So that internal stimulus is going to send signals to the brain telling us that we are hungry and we need to go get some food and eat that food. External stimuli would be something like the temperature that we're experiencing. So this could be in the summertime, we walk outside, it's really, really hot, and so our body's going to detect that and respond to it by starting the process of sweating to help us cool down. On the flip side, if you go outside in the winter and it's really, really cold, and maybe you're not wearing a jacket or something, then your body's going to detect that and it's going to respond by starting the process of shivering frequently, which is tiny little contractions of your muscles that are going to produce heat and help warm you up. So this responsiveness has those two components that not just is detection of different stimuli, but response to it in order to kind of maintain our baseline level, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Movement is another essential function that we do. So our bodies move in very obvious ways that you've probably already thought of, like walking or running or exercise or something like that. But there's also a lot of hidden ways that our bodies move. So our blood cells, as you are sitting here right now and as I'm talking right now, blood cells are moving through your body. Red blood cells are going through your blood vessels, carrying oxygen and carbon dioxide and nutrients and waste products back and forth. And there's also immune cells that are migrating through your different tissues and your blood vessels, looking out for pathogens and things that should not be there, so that it can get rid of them. So digestion is another good process that we don't really think about as movement, but movement is essential for digestion to occur. We'll talk more about that when we get into the digestive system itself. And then development, and we're going to kind of combine a few different things into development. So development is all of the changes that our bodies go through throughout the course of our life, and it includes 3 different components, which are growth, differentiation, and reproduction. So growth is something that all living things have the capacity to do, and really, in a sense, are required to do that. So growth is an increase in size that occurs when there's a higher rate of anabolism, that building form of metabolism, than catabolism, where we're breaking things down. So this is why that anabolism is so important, because without it, we don't grow, we don't repair ourselves. And so growth is really, really important. Obviously, we grow from infancy up through adulthood. You grow in both size as well as the number of cells within your body. You may not think about it like that, but that is what's happening. More cells means we need more space, and so things are going to keep growing and getting bigger. Differentiation is when cells change from one type into another. Usually this starts with a stem cell, this kind of cell type that can become a variety of different cells. There's different levels of stem cell types. We'll talk a little bit more about those next week when we cover cells specifically. So we start with these very generalized cells that could turn into a wide variety of things, and then they will slowly, over a series of different changes, become very specialized cells. And so the graphic I have up here is kind of this flow chart that we show for hematopoiesis, which is the development of different types of blood cells. And so we can start at the top with what we call a multipotent hematopoietic stem cell. So this is a general stem cell that knows it's going to become a blood cell of some sort, but there's different signals, different chemical signals that we're going to get in our bodies saying, hey, we need more red blood cells. So then it is going to start heading down this myeloid stem cell line. and kind of continue from there. So we'll talk more about this process of hematopoiesis when we do the cardiovascular system in blood later on in the semester. And then reproduction. So this is the formation of new organisms from parents. Humans, we start out as a tiny little embryo and then slowly progress to fetus and then an infant, toddler, so on and so forth until we reach adulthood. And so this reproduction in humans is sexual reproduction. We'll talk more about this later on in the semester, but this requires combining genetic materials from two parents in order to produce offspring. There is asexual reproduction. This is commonly seen in bacteria, but we're not really going to get into detail about that in this particular class. You can take microbiology with me later on if you want to learn about asexual reproduction in bacteria. All right, now we get into one of the big foundational principles of all living things, but again, we're focused on humans here, and that is homeostasis. So homeostasis, like I mentioned in the previous lecture, is absolutely essential to our health and well-being. And there's different ways that our body achieves homeostasis. Those are negative and positive feedback loops. So we're going to talk about all of these different things for section 5. So homeostasis is a set range or point that our body is trying to constantly maintain, and so it has to constantly monitor our internal environment and the external environment, in fact, in order to maintain homeostasis. And so set points are single values that are going to have a little bit of fluctuation that's considered normal. So our body temperature, the average body temperature is seen as 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. I tend to run a little bit lower than that personally. Some of you maybe run a little bit higher than that. And some of you are going to be pretty much right on the money there. So a set point is that one single value, but there is a normal amount of fluctuation above or below that particular number. And then normal ranges are a set of values that kind of encompass what that fluctuation would be. So if our average body temperature is this set point of 98.6, our normal range that is seen in humans is anywhere between about 97 degrees Fahrenheit and 99 degrees Fahrenheit. And so some people, like I said, I tend to run a little bit on the lower end of this. I'm actually usually around 96.8 or 0.9 personally, so that's not too far off of 97. And I've got one of my closest friends tends to run much on the higher end of the spectrum, closer to the 99 degrees Fahrenheit range. And so this is that normal range where your temperature could be anywhere in there and you are still totally healthy and stable and nothing is wrong. Too much lower than that 97, 96, and you're starting to get into some more dangerous territory. And then obviously we all know that much above 99 degrees, once you get up to 100, 101, so on and so forth, that is a fever. And that can get very dangerous very, very quickly because it's going to lead to a lot of dehydration, among other things. So again, like I mentioned earlier, our body maintains homeostasis through a couple different mechanisms, negative and positive feedback loops. The most common is a negative feedback loop. And so the way feedback loops work is that there is some sort of stimulus that signals a change, and then the body's going to do something in response to that in order to try to bring the body back into homeostasis. So in a negative feedback loop, we have a stimulus, something changes, and the body's going to sense that, and then it's going to have that response. It's going to signal some sort of change to happen, and as that changes, it's going to kind of backtrack and cause another stimulus, and it kind of keeps going until your body has returned to that normal level, whatever that normal range is. And so for body temperature, for example, just like we just talked about, This is using Celsius in this example, but 37 degrees Celsius is approximately 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, just to kind of do that conversion for you. So 37 degrees Celsius is normal human body temperature at a set point. And so if your temperature goes up, you're running a fever, again, we're getting up into 100, 101, 102 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the stimulus, is that increase in body temperature. And the nerve cells in your skin and brain are going to sense that increase in temperature, and that is going to signal to the regulatory center in the brain that controls temperature, which is then going to signal the body to start producing sweat through the sweat glands, among other mechanisms, in an attempt to cool the body off. And that's going to keep going, and it will eventually feed back on that original stimulus until the body achieves that normal temperature of roughly 37 degrees Celsius, at which point it will stop the signaling cascade, because now we've achieved homeostasis again. We do not need to keep trying to cool the body off, because if we kept trying to cool the body off and there was no feedback signaling, hey, everything's good now, we can stop sweating, then you will keep getting cooler and cooler and cooler, which again is going to throw the body out of homeostasis, just in the opposite direction in this case. So negative feedback loops are very, very common. They are the most common type of feedback loop in the body. Hormones are another thing that occur in negative feedback loops. So thyroid stimulating hormone, for example, has to be very tightly regulated, because thyroid hormones control our metabolism, actually. We'll talk more about that with the endocrine system, but we want to keep thyroid stimulating hormone within a very, very narrow window of what's considered to be a normal amount of production. And so if there's too much or too little being produced, then we're going to start the signal cascade until we get more of that thyroid hormone being produced, which will then signal that we can stop this particular cascade. Positive feedback. Relatively uncommon, not unheard of, very, very useful for the systems it does exist in. The classic example of this is actually pregnancy, and specifically labor. And so what happens in positive feedback loops is we still get that initial stimulus. In this particular case, it is the head of the baby pushing against the cervix, because it is in the process of being expelled from the uterus to be born. And so that stimulus is going to cause nerve impulses from the cervix to be transmitted up to the brain. And then the brain will stimulate our pituitary gland to secrete the hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin is going to travel to the uterus and cause the contractions of the uterus and that muscular wall to help force that baby out. And so this is going to keep going until the baby is out, and that stimulus ends up being removed completely in this case, rather than being signaled to stop. Because obviously once labor starts, it should not stop. That is very, very bad. But this is going to keep basically increasing the amount of oxytocin and the amount of uterine contractions that are happening in order to get that baby out. And it is only once the baby has been born and has stopped putting pressure on the cervix that all of these signaling pathways will stop, because we've just removed that stimulus from the equation completely. But until then, we need to actually increase all of these different processes, especially that hormone production and the uterine contractions, because without those, that baby is not going to make it out. All right, so between negative and positive feedback, that is how our body maintains homeostasis. Again, negative feedback loops are far, far more common in our body, but positive feedback loops do exist, and they do have their place and are absolutely essential when we do have them. All right, so that wraps up our second lecture. Next lecture, we will move on to anatomical terminology, which we will also be covering in lab, but it's really important, so it bears covering it twice, I think.